Alec Guinness was known as an acting chameleon, capable of adapting himself to any part. It was a reputation he won after playing a huge range of roles in some of the best British films ever made. Ealing comedies like Lavender Hill Mob and The Kind Hearts and Coronets, and a run of classics directed by David Lean, including Great Expectations, Oliver Twist, Lawrence of Arabia, and Bridge Over the River Kwai, for which he won the Best Actor Oscar in 1957. And 2 years after that, he was knighted and became Sir Alec Guinness. It was quite a rise, and we join him here in 1973 talking to Tony Bilbo on the Film Extra programme about how it all started.
I wonder if we could go right back, Sir Alec, to your childhood. Your parents weren't actors. What did your father do?
Well, my father, I never knew. I mean, he was out of my life when I was, a baby. But he was a bank manager. No connection with the theatre at all. And I've really sort of lived on my own since I was about 14 or something like that, on and off.
So at what point did you realise that, you had to be an actor?
I don't know. I mean, hindsight and is very clever. I consciously knew I wanted to be an actor by the time I was 16, that's for sure. If I look back now, I think I always was an actor from, the age of 5 or 6 or something. I was always, in dormitories at school, telling stories. They'd all fallen fast asleep, but I went on telling, nighttime stories and acting them out madly in my bed in the dark.
And you've no idea why?
I suppose, I think it's a great mistake to, I would never go to a psychoanalyst to sort this out for me. I don't want to know why. I guess kind of lonelinesses and insecurity of personality and character, and therefore latching on to make-believe and pretending. For me, acting is just, let's pretend. Still is. You have to apply it, or you learn certain skills, and then they become too much, and you have to try and abandon them. But it is, let's pretend, and I think anything that goes much beyond that becomes pretentious.
Yes, I don't want to delve into pop psychology, but are you, as a generality, happier when you're acting than doing anything else?
I'm happier when I'm rehearsing, because then all antennae are out, particularly in the theatre, because the rehearsal period then lasts a month, roughly. Film rehearsals, of course, are inclined to be very, off the cuff and swift, but even then, it seems to me I'm at my most alive, both in trying to find a character, in the general situation, what the whole thing's about, and an alertness as to where one is and what one's doing. Once the acting job is started, it's, I suppose, in a way, like an office job.
It was one of the periods in your life when I imagine you didn't feel particularly alive, was when you left school and went into an advertising agency.
Oh, yes.
You were a copywriter, weren't you?
I was a copywriter, and then they took me off that very kindly and made me a layout man. I was disastrous with that, and they put me back to copywriting.
What did you have to write?
I wrote boring little ads for Rose's lime juice at one time. I was virtually Wilkinson's razor blades, Philips lamps, Mallard radio, everything about which I knew nothing.
Did you come up with any original slogans?
Oh, me? No, for heaven's sake. No. I was in offices when original slogans came up. I have made very good friends. They were sweet to me there, but I earned £1 a week, 30 bob a week by the time I left.
Were you worth it?
No, I cost them a lot of money. The Daily Mail appeared one morning with a vast empty space, which is where my ad should have been.
What happened then? You decided advertising?
Well, I was always wanting to be an actor. It was a question of how to, I didn't know any actors. I didn't know how one started. And while I was at the advertising agency, I got onto Martita Hunt, who became a very great friend of mine, as I thought I would try and get into the Royal Academy. And I had no money, and so this meant trying to get a scholarship. And so I went to her for, hour lessons on my voice and this, that, and the other. I don't think she taught me a thing about anything to do with that, but she taught me a lot about life. I mean, she formed my taste in many ways, which was far more valuable. And when I arrived at the appointed time at the Royal Academy, I was met by a lady who said, "What a good thing you haven't come down from Scotland. We're not giving any more scholarships this year." So I was left with egg on my face, to a degree, and near tears. And I ran into a girl whom I used to know as a child, but within minutes, and wept on her shoulder. And she said, "Well, you better run down Baker Street to the Faye Compton studio, where they are holding auditions this minute." And I dashed there, and I was just in time, and I got the scholarship.
You eventually joined John Gielgud's company, and then you joined the Old Vic in 1936. But your film career really started in 1946 with Great Expectations, didn't it?
That's right, yes. It was the first film I've done, apart from appearing for one day when I was a student as a walking on, an extra in Evensong. And I swore I would never, ever do that again, the way they were treated.
What do you mean, the extras?
Yes, I thought, that's not for me. And I thought I will never go into films until if I'm going to be offered something in films, it must be something I've already played in the theatre. And it so happened that I'd done an stage adaptation of Great Expectations, in which I'd also appeared.
It was Herbert Pocket, wasn't it?
That's right, yes. And David Lean and Ronald Neame had seen that and remembered it, and then they decided to do the film, and they also remembered me, and as the war was coming to its close, finished actually, contacted me. And that was the start of, working for the films.
But even with that success, it's odd, it seems to me, that you managed to land the part of Fagin in Oliver Twist, because after all, you were still quite young, and in theory, for you to play Fagin was ridiculous.
Well, that's the only time I've ever gone out after a part. I absolutely was determined to play that. And David Lean was wonderful. I mean, he listened to me. I mean, my thing to him was at the time, you would never think of, when I heard they were going to do Oliver Twist, you'd never think of casting me as Fagin. He said, "Not in 1,000 years, And I said, "That's where you're wrong, because you people in films are only interested in types. You're not interested in anyone actually trying to act." And I think he was a bit startled and didn't agree. And he said, "Well, I'll give you a test." So a test was arranged, and I got it.
Mind you, your interpretation of the part caused a little trouble, I think, in America. They were a bit touchy about it, weren't they?
Yes, the Russians were touchy about it in Central Europe, because they were determined that it should be called anti-Semitic. The word Jew was never mentioned in it, because there was no question of it being anti-Semitic. As indeed, Dickens was accused of being anti-Semitic, which he hadn't, and then he went and wrote another novel, to make a sympathetic. I maintain the character had been, Jew, Arab, or nothing.
In the 60s, your film output slowed down. You did a lot of stage work, Ross, Exit the King, Macbeth, Dylan on Broadway. Do you think of yourself first and foremost as a man of the theatre?
I think of myself as an actor. Yes, I'm sure. But I started in the theatre. My early years were the theatre. And funnily enough, I've nearly always, with the exception, I think, of 1 year when I did maybe 2 or 2.5 films in, I have always managed to do something in the theatre in it, because it's very good, I find, to tackle or come in face to face with a live audience. And I also wanted to keep many actors who go into films who've been in the stage, and long years go by, and then they get a chance to go into the theatre again, and they become petrified at facing an audience and shy away from it and get very frightened. And I was being determined that shouldn't happen to me. And on the whole, I'm happier in the theatre, not from any other reason than in the theatre you're your own boss. If something has to be cut, a scene has to go, or a few lines or a speech or something, then you can mold your performance round that gap, or if something extra goes in, whatever the case may be. Whereas acting for the films, which has its other delights, if something goes, you cannot adjust your performance if it's snipped at the end. I mean, I've seen performances of myself on the screen in which the end has been put at the beginning, and vice versa. And if I knew that had been going to happen, I would have performed differently throughout. And so I feel I'm not my own boss when filming, whereas I am in the theatre.
4 years later, Guinness's latest film had, to his surprise, just become one of the biggest box office hits of all time. Star Wars. It meant an appearance on Parkinson, but the conversation opened with an examination of his whole approach to the art of acting.
How do you go about it? It's a thing that always fascinates me when I talk to actors, particularly great actors, about how you build a part, about what comes first in building up a character and this sort of thing. I always find, too, by the way, that actors don't like being asked this question very much. And I can tell by your face that you're not much savouring it either.
Well, I don't know. I
Thank
really
you,
don't
that's what I
know.
was going to say.
I don't know how one, obviously one's imagination and what the author has presented one on the script are vitally important. If I get stuck, actually that Lavender Hill mob part, which we've just seen, that I did based on two things. I went to the zoo, and in the rodent house, in the small rodents, I saw some little round-eyed, nervousy little character, rather sort of fluffy, and I thought, maybe that's maybe something on those lines. And then I realized that a bank clerk at my bank looked very much like it, so I settled on the bank clerk's voice. There were two clips, both with no R's. I'm playing with the Fagin and that. So that was a kind of very much a bit of observation and tilted up, of course,
Yes.
no end. But when I have got stuck, I have very often gone to the zoo and see if some animal would give me some
Really?
clue.
Why the zoo?
Well, the only place where you can find strange animals around. When I did Richard III in Canada, I'd spent a lot of time. I searched around. I thought an eagle, maybe, and no, I'm not really kind of an eagle type. And then I found a creature called the unsociable vulture. I used to visit him. Every 2 or 3 days he got to know me. He was very kind of inquisitive, kind of full of. He was quite a sociable chap, actually.
But, I mean, what were you getting from the unsociable vulture, Sir Alec, that you could possibly use on stage?
Oh, I don't know what, something little, some little something at the back of my mind, or indeed maybe a walk or a mannerism or something like that.
I mean, how could you demonstrate, say, a notion you had once with a bird or something to show me exactly what you mean?
Well, I think I first sort of got the idea that animals might be helpful in my profession before the war in the Cairo Zoo. I was on tour playing Hamlet, and there was a bird there called a shoebill. It's all right if I stand up because
sure.
I don't think I can do this anymore. But it stands about that high, and it's grey, very soberly pale grey, and it doesn't like being watched. That appealed to me at no end. It likes to watch other people, and it has a very, very big beak, rather like a kind of shape of some enormous shoe, a great big grey thing there and a little eye out there. And I first spotted it, and it was standing on one foot with a kind of little tail out. I don't think it would stand up anymore. And kind of eyeing one. And I noticed that whenever I turned away, it moved, but it would never move while I was watching it. So you have to sort of pretend every time I say now, you really have to turn away and look back. So he was standing looking at me, and one would say now and turn away, and then you turn back and one would say now and now.
So, but how did you use that in the part of Hamlet?
Oh, I didn't play Hamlet like that. No, I did have a disastrous Hamlet later on, but it wasn't through doing a bird. No, it gave me the idea that maybe I would get some sort of amusing kind of movement or something from. I'm very devoted to animals.
You are?
Yes, indeed. And I love watching them. In Ceylon later, may I tell a little sort of animal story?
Please do.
I loved the elephants one saw around. And one afternoon I went down to watch a lot of elephants working, pushing great tree trunks down into the river, which was a very fast river. And all the elephants except one rolled these big trees down into the river with that part of their nose kind of pushing and rolling very successfully, very skillfully, and very soberly. Pushed on thing, and the tree would get into the water and gradually kind of get shifted away by the current. But there was one enormous rogue elephant there with a chain round his tummy, which meant that he probably killed someone, but he was a very wise, huge old fellow. With great big floppy ears going around. And he didn't do this at all. He pushed it as if it was a pencil. He kind of got his nose and pushed it the difficult way towards the water. And I thought, now why? Because one or two people said, no, you watch that elephant. And some of the film crew were arguing, silly old so-and-so, look at him, why didn't he just roll it like the others? That kind of goes down. And it was as if he heard them, because he was very, very slow in all his kind of movements, the way he kind of came and pushed at this huge tree. And the little eye kind of took us all in. And he thinks, you think I'm a fool, don't you? And the others are all the clever ones. And he very, very slowly left it, moved round. And as he just got back, he gave us all a little tiny, wicked look and flipped it with his back foot.
What a lovely story.
I adored the elephant.
Yeah. You were telling me earlier, actually, that you told me that you had a parrot once that you tried to teach how to act, didn't you?
Oh, I didn't teach how to act. No, I was a splendid actor. I tried to teach it a Hamlet soliloquy. We didn't get very far. He was a South African grey, and I was very fond of him. He's dead now, alas, poor old thing. He's gone to a feathered world elsewhere.
Yes.
About 4 years ago. But he used to get as far as I didn't teach him the accent or the tone. I mean, I did it quite straight at him. But he finally used to say, "Oh, what a rogue and peasant slave am I! Is it not monstrous that this parrot?"
Was it a pet?
Oh, yes.
It was a
yes,
pet.
Yes,
I mean,
indeed.
what kind of pets do you keep?
Well, I had, after the time in Ceylon when I was doing Bridge on the River Kwai, I took to tropical birds for a bit, for a few years. I haven't got them now because there were always tragedies when I was away and I couldn't bear it anymore. At the moment, I've only got 2 dogs and a cat and 3 goats.
3 goats, yeah. You were mentioning there watching out, observing animals, and sometimes get an idea for a walk from an animal. In fact, you've been on record as saying that you only really start getting into a part when you get a walk. Is that right?
Yes, I think so. I don't sort of feel happy until I'm doing it from the ground upwards, so to speak. This used to be very self-consciously done when I was a student, and it really came because I had no money to spend. I could allow myself 6pence a week, and there was really no entertainment. I used to spend that 6pence a week on going to the gallery at the Old Vic, and the rest of the time was following people in the street, surreptitiously, of course. And I used to follow people and watch their walks, and I felt I got to know something about them. and I used to imitate their walks behind them.
Really?
And I began to feel at least I know their mood, or that they're in, or whatever their ailments are, or whatever it might be. And that kind of got rather stuck. I don't do it now. I very seldom nowadays, laziness, consciously observe what someone's doing.
Yes.
I've lived on that store for many years. I really should store up again, I suppose.
Yes, I suppose that when you're in a part, then you draw something from the back of your mind that you observed some time ago, the way somebody moved. Or
Well, I think it's got to become, or for me anyway, got to kind of become unconscious again. I mean, there was a time when I used to consciously think, I remember seeing that man do that, as probably I did in the Lavender Hill mob film. But it's kind of best if you've forgotten and comes up again and you don't quite know where it's come from.
What about that famous walk in River Kwai? You mentioned the film there, when you've been put in that awful isolation thing, and you had that extraordinary, staggering, lurching walk across the parade ground when they let you go. Where did that come from?
Well, that's a sort of very personal one. But it's true because it shows the funny process that does go on with an actor, maybe. My son had polio when he was about 12 and was paralyzed from the waist down. He's fine now. I mean, he can, plays rugby and rushes around, does whatever he wants. But when he was recovering, and walking again a bit, it was obviously a very stiff, strange walk. And I had a little cine camera, and I remember when he was first walking, taking shots of this, and then when one saw it on the screen, my wife and I persuaded ourselves that he was fine, he was walking fine, but obviously deep down inside one thought, oh Lord, he's going to limp for life or something, of that nature. And years later, when it came to doing that scene on the River Kwai, I found myself doing the identical walk that I had on that little cine camera from 5-6 years previously. I'd entirely forgotten. I didn't know I was doing it. It was only when I saw myself on the screen, I thought, where on earth did that curious, slightly lurchy, bent walk come from? It was the same as I had on the cine camera.
It was extraordinary. But what about the great film stars that you met in your long career in the movies? I mean, who are the ones that you remember most vividly?
Well, that's difficult. Most vividly, they've all been fairly vivid. One's met a great number. When I first went to Hollywood, an unlikely story, but true, there was a party at whatever the hotel was, Beverly Hills Hotels, I think. Enormous party, hadn't been asked, and it was being given by John Wayne, and he suddenly heard I was in the hotel, and very kindly, about midnight, phoned up and said, oh, come on down, put on a black tie and come on down. And so I was thrilled and went down to this great gathering. And it was the first time I met Betty Bacall, whom I was very chummy with and liked. And I was talking to her, and she was ravishing and marvelous, when a well-known Hollywood agent came up and dragged her and said, oh, you mustn't be seen talking to that limey, come on. And I was so furious, I've only clocked anyone ever in my life, and I clocked him. and I flew out in a rage, back up to, ripped off my black tie, back into bed, and, crossly down, ashamed of myself, but also very angry with this chap. And the phone went again, and it was John Wayne again saying, oh, I hear this, come on down again, come, you got to make it up. So down I down onto my black tie again, down, and thought I behaved very well. And by then, of course, it had become something of a scandal, and a lot of people had gathered around. And he said, I want you to shake hands with this man. He's dead now. Not through my blow. And so we solemnly shook hands again, and rather coldly, but solemnly. And there was a lot of applause for that, whereupon I clocked him again.
So while shaking hands, you pulled him on.
I mean, it was something he said again. I don't know what it was, but it drove me mad. And, but John Wayne was marvellous about it. He was very kind of comforting. And from someone, I got a huge box of cigars the next day. I don't know.
Probably everybody in the room, Sir Alec, had been wanting to do what you did.
I think that was what was behind it.
Probably the case. You also met Dean, didn't you, James
Well,
Dean?
my very first night in Hollywood, I met James Dean. It was a very, very odd occurrence. I'd arrived off the plane, but those were, took a long time in those days, about 16 hours flight. And I'd been met by Grace Kelly and various people, but I found that I was alone for myself for the evening. And a woman I knew phoned up and said, let me take you out to dinner. And we went to various places, and she was wearing trousers, and they wouldn't let her in any of the smart Hollywood restaurants. Think of it, whatever it was, 1952, 54, something like that. However, we finally went to a little Italian dive, and that was full. And so one got turned away. I said, honestly, I don't mind just a hamburger anyway. I was hungry by then. And then I heard feet running down the street, and it was James Dean. And he said, I was in that restaurant, you couldn't get a table. And my name's James Dean. He said, will you come and join me? So we said, yes, very kind of him. And then going back into the restaurant, he said, before we go in, I must show you something. I've just got a new car. And there in the courtyard of this little restaurant was I don't know what the car was, some little silver, very smart thing, all done up in cellophane with a bunch of roses tied to its bonnet. And I said, how fast can you drive in this? He said, I can do 150 in it. And I said, have you driven it? He said, no, I've never been in it at all. And some strange thing came over me, some almost different voice. And I said, look, I won't join your table unless you want me to, but I must say something. Please do not get into that car. Because if you do, and I looked at my watch, and I said, if you get into that car at all, it's now Thursday, whatever the date was, 10 o'clock at night, and by 10 o'clock at night, next Thursday, you'll be dead if you get into that car. I said, oh, nonsense. So we went and had dinner, we had a charming dinner, and he was dead the following Thursday afternoon in that car. It was one of those odd things.
Has it ever happened to you before?
No, I'm glad to say. But it was one of a very, very odd, spooky experience. He was, I liked him very much too. I'd love to have known him more.
Yes. Now let's talk about the latest aspect of your career, which is, it's quite extraordinary. You've been all these years in movies, and now all of a sudden you've hit the jackpot with a thing called Star Wars, which I saw last week, and I think just loved it. I think it's super. I think it's marvelous escapism, and it'll clean up. But how did you come to be involved with a piece of science fiction like that?
Well, it arrived as a script. I was just finishing a picture in Hollywood another day to go, and the script arrived on my dressing table, and I heard that it had been delivered by George Lucas, and I thought, well, that's rather impressive, because he's an up-and-coming and very respect-worthy young director. So, and then when I opened it and found it was science fiction, I thought, oh, crumbs, this is simply not for me. And then I started reading, and it seemed to me the dialogue was pretty ropey. But I had to go on turning the page. And that's an essential in any script. You've got to know what happens next, or what's going to be said next. And I went on reading, and I thought, no, I like this. If only we can get some of the dialogue altered. And then I met him, we got on very well, and I found myself doing it, that's all.
And it's made more money than any other movie ever made.
So I'm told.
And
yes.
you've got yourself part of the action.
Ah, well.
2.5%, isn't it?
No, not quite that, no.
What is it? Sir Alec, how much is it?
Well, you want that story.
Please.
I tried to keep this dark. I don't know where this all sprang from. I think it was the Evening Standard to blame for this. I had a contract. My agent said, I've asked for 2% of whatever, because we didn't think it would make any, I've had a percentage on a film before, and they lose money like mad if I have a percentage. And I said, oh, fine, all right, 2%. And the day before the film opened in San Francisco, George Lucas phoned me and said, he's he's like Alan Bennett, he's very diffident and very shy and quiet, and he has a funny little voice. And he said, I think the movie's kind of going to be all right. I said, oh, I'm glad, George. And he said, yeah, the press quite like it. I said, good. He said, we're pleased with, very grateful for little alterations you suggested, and so we'd like to offer you another 0.5%. By making it 2.5. I said, well, that's marvelous, thank you very much. But a matter of a few weeks later, in fact, the day I saw the film, I've just seen it once, the producer, who again is a charming, delightful chap, I said, about this little extra something you were kindly offering, I wonder if we could have something in writing just so that, my agent and so on believes this. And he said, oh, about the 0.25%, yes.
No fool there. Yeah. So it's 2.25%. We've put that right, yes, sadly. All right, let's then now have a look at Star Wars, a clip here. I couldn't begin to appreciate or lead up to this clip.
Don't ask me either.
No, if you don't know, nobody does. But here we are. You play a sort of guru figure. Here you are.
I have something here for you. Your father wanted you to have this when you were old enough, but your uncle wouldn't allow it. He feared you might follow old Obi-Wan on some damn fool idealistic crusade like your father did.
Sir, if you'll not be needing me, I'll close down for a while.
Sure, go ahead.
What is it? Your father's lightsaber. This is the weapon of a Jedi Knight. Not as clumsy or random as a blaster. An elegant weapon for a more civilized age. For over 1,000 generations, the Jedi Knights were the guardians of peace and justice in the old Republic. Before the dark times. Before the Empire.
How did my father die?
A young Jedi named Darth Vader, who was a pupil of mine until he turned to evil, helped the Empire hunt down and destroy the Jedi Knights. He betrayed and murdered your father. Now the Jedi are all but extinct. Vader was seduced by the dark side of the Force.
The Force?
Now, the Force is what gives the Jedi his power. It's an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us and penetrates us. It binds the galaxy together.
You said you saw the film, Sir Alec. What's the fascination of it to you, do you think?
I think a marvelous, healthy innocence.
Yes.
Great pace, wonderful to look at, full of guts, nothing unpleasant. I mean, people go bang, bang, and people fall over and are dead. But, no horrors, no sleazy sex. In fact, actually, no sex at all if it comes to that. And a sort of wonderful freshness about it, kind of like a wonderful fresh air. When I came out of the cinema into Tottenham Court Road, I thought, oh, Lord, London's awfully sort of gritty and dirty and full of rubbish, isn't it? Because this had all been so
I think that's
invigorating.
Absolutely right, actually. One of the few movies I've come out of recently where I really felt happy and uplifted when I came out. I'd enjoyed myself, actually.
That's all. I mean, people are going to read too much into it. It's a simple stuff for all ages.
Are they doing that now with you because of the kind of, sort
Doing
of
what?
reading more into it, the sort of guru figure that you play?
Oh, yes, I'm getting some pretty strange letters.
Are
I
you?
don't mind telling you.
Really? I can imagine, actually.
Oh, no, surely, yes. My wife and I have got problems. Would you come over and live with us for a few months? I think
Yes. You could have yourself a fine time.
The success of Star Wars meant Guinness never had to work again, and he grew increasingly selective about the roles he accepted. He won huge praise for his portrayal of George Smiley in the BBC series Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy and Smiley's People, He also started writing what became an acclaimed series of autobiographies, and then, in 1988, he was nominated for an Oscar for another Dickens role, a 6-hour version of Little Dorrit that he discussed in this interview with Barry Norman.
So, Alec, were you in any way daunted when you were asked to play Dorrit to learn that the film was going to run for 6 hours?
I thought it was an absolutely astonishing, foolhardy job. I'm not daunted from my own point of view, but I thought, how the heck are they going to do a film which is in 2 parts for that amount of time? But they've brought it off.
What about the character of Dorrit that you play? Presumably you don't just take a part because it's offered to you. There must be something there that attracts you. What was it that attracted you to that role?
Well, flattered, first of all, to be asked to do it. Then thought I'd better read the novel, which I'd never done. And there's a feckless, vain, silly, but kindly man, full of foolish schemes and a great folie de grandeur when he comes out of prison. And I could see little shades of myself here and there in that, perhaps. Anyway, I thought it was worth making a stab at.
What parts of yourself did you find in that list of adjectives, none of which is terribly complimentary?
Wrong decisions, stupidities, sometimes thinking things are going to turn out wonderfully well when they're not. I mean, just not thinking things through.
See to my cuff, Amy, if you please. How long you've been. You're a good girl. You're a very good girl. My favorite child. It's not very hot. Were there any letters?
No, Father.
What am I to do if that letter doesn't come? What am I to do, fettered as I am? Are you quite sure there were no letters? Can't someone carry the hot water for you?
It's not heavy.
My daughter shouldn't be seen carrying the hot water.
You watched that, the blank face. Were you unimpressed, or do you just not like seeing yourself on screen?
I don't like seeing myself on screen, but I'm afraid under the blank face, I had an admiration, not for myself, let me hasten to add, but for Dickens and the wonderful variety of thoughts you get through that. I mean, the vanity, the petulance, the snobism, the selfishness, all there in every sentence.
Would it be true to say that the film part anyway, that brought you most first strongly to the public attention was again in Dickens, was Oliver Twist in Fagin? Now, I believe that you had to fight very hard to get that role.
I don't know whether I had to fight. I approached David Lean saying, you know, I would love to play Fagin, and I was, 34, 35, something like that. And he obviously thought it was a bit mad as an idea.
Why are you awake? Speak out, boy, quick.
I couldn't sleep any longer, sir.
What have you seen?
Nothing, sir.
You were not awake an hour ago.
No, indeed, sir.
Are you sure?
Yes, sir.
My dear. I only tried to frighten you. Did you see any of those pretty things, dear?
What do you think of that one?
Howard Davis is splendid. I don't know. It's a bit theatrical, isn't it?
Because after Kind Hearts and Coronets, which came very soon after Oliver Twist, you were given this name of the Man of 1,000 Faces. It took you a long time to live that down, didn't it?
Oh, that was a publicity stunt which has dogged me not all my life, but for so many years.
There's one further question I must ask you, Sir Alec. You're wearing what looks like designer stubble. Now, I imagine that you are not vying with Mickey Rourke for a part in a film. Could you explain?
No, but this is kind of a week old or something like that, and it's got another couple of weeks to go.
before I go to Venezuela on film location for Evelyn Waugh's A Handful of Dust.
There is quite a nice tie-up, isn't there, between A Handful of Dust and indeed the film we started off discussing this evening, Little Dorrit.
Yes, it's pure coincidence. But the last line that I have to say, I mean, it's in Evelyn Waugh's novel, in A Handful of Dust, is to the young man who's reading Dickens to me. I say, let us read Little Dorrit again. No, lovely from my point of view.
The following year, Guinness received a fellowship from BAFTA. He carried on working occasionally into the 1990s and died in West Sussex in the year 2000, aged 86. The obituaries called him the most versatile actor of the 20th century and quoted his response when he was asked what he'd be doing if he hadn't become an actor. His answer? I don't know what else I could do but pretend to be an actor.